This is your guide to making more enjoyable videos with greater visual impact. The problem with many videos today is that they consist of overly cluttered, awkwardly composed shots. There's often distorted sound, inadequate lighting, unnecessary zooming, panning or tilting, and editing which draws attention to itself. There is an alternative. And here's how to do it. Generally, when an object is placed about the center of the screen, the result tends to be somewhat dull and unmemorable. A useful technique to bear in mind for more attractive composition is the rule of thirds. If instead of imagining the screen in even proportions, mentally divide the picture area into thirds and place the main features of interest close to the points of intersection, then a more satisfying result can usually be obtained. The rule of thirds can also be applied to horizons, but it would be impractical to use it here. It's a useful starting point, one which you should bear in mind as you compose more shots. The rule of thirds is often combined with diagonals in order to create a greater sense of depth within a picture. The diagonal framing from top left to bottom right makes this roller coaster appear to come towards us. This stairway shot, taken at the top of Launceston Castle, is greatly enhanced by the use of this approach. And the same applies to this one taken at Tintagel. Unless there are several planes, a picture can often look very flat and two-dimensional. Framing devices such as the pillars on the steps and the dark archway lead the viewer's eyes from one plane to the next, creating a greater sense of depth. Similarly, the openings in these rocks, part of the body of the ride framing the roller coaster, achieve the same kind of effect. In each of the previous examples, the framing device is quite some distance from the camera. If you place it as close to the lens as possible, an even greater illusion of depth is obtained. A wide-angle lens can really help here. Here is an example of adjusting the distance with an ordinary lens. But a wide-angle lens can make quite a difference to the shot. Here's another example with an ordinary lens. In this shot, there are 3 levels of depth, but with the camera moved as close to the rock as possible and the addition of a wide-angle lens, there's a considerable improvement. See how depth is also suggested in the relative speeds that one plane moves to another. Your compositions don't have to be restricted by straight-on shots. It's often more interesting to vary both height and angle. See how the height of this building is emphasized through this shot, whilst the length and width are expressed in this shot. Both convey more information than this shot. Likewise, these shots show that you're not restricted by how high you can take the camera. This is more effective than this shot. It's often tempting to film people at eye level. Just a slight change of angle can often make all the difference. You can even pivot the camera from side to side. This is called a Dutch tilt. Here are some examples. The depth of field is simply the distance between the nearest and furthest points in a shot that are in acceptably sharp focus. If you move the camera away from your subject, but keep the lens angle the same, in other words, you don't zoom in or out, then the depth of field will increase. If you keep the distance the same, but zoom in towards your subject, then the depth of field will decrease. But the most important thing to know is that if you move the camera away from the subject and zoom all the way in so that the subject is framed exactly as before, then the depth of field stays the same. Only the perspective changes. If you stop down your lens, making a narrow entrance for the light to get through, then your depth of field increases. As a general rule of thumb, if you want to keep the subject in focus but blur the background, first physically separate them from any object that's too near. Then zoom in as far as possible. If you want more of the subject in shot, then move further back. Here's an example of how you might incorporate this idea. Be careful in dull lighting conditions, since focusing on objects can be very difficult indeed. With more light, you get greater depth of field, and focusing becomes sharper. Many cameras with a zoom lens also have what's called a macro setting. This can be used to shoot small objects, which can be placed right up against the lens and fill the whole screen. These shots were framed without a macro lens. See how uncomfortable these shots feel. Don't cut people off at the joints. To make the effect more natural, realign the shot so that the frame cuts partway along their limbs. These shots also look unbalanced. Simply readjust the shot so that the subject looks across the frame. You must be careful where you place your subjects. Simple solution, not to place your subjects against a background which is emitting a great deal of light. Be careful though, the sloping backgrounds tend to look rather odd. The orange and red hues characteristic of sunset can often be enhanced with the use of a tobacco filter. Here are examples using a graduated grey filter. Here's an example using a spot diffuser from the point of view of someone who's just woken up. A neutral density filter cuts out light. The lens aperture opens to compensate. Use this to restrict depth of field when you're unable to move the camera. Sometimes sunny weather makes white objects flare. Here's another use for the neutral density filter. Be careful, if you use a filter for the sake of an effect, the result can often look out of place. Unsteady shots can ruin a video. A common mistake is to hold the camera like this. This position is steadier, however, with the camera supported in the palm of the hand. You can also improve steadiness by resting on the ground with your elbows on your knees or thighs. Lying flat on the ground, leaning on a steady object with your legs bent and slightly apart. Leaning against something stable. Or, if all else fails, use a tripod. A pan is achieved by moving the camera from side to side, steadily. The temptation is often to speed up, slow down or pan because of a belief that the camera should move whether it ends up on anything interesting or not. My advice is don't pan. Keep the camera still and let the subject do the moving. If you must pan, here are some worthwhile pointers to bear in mind. If you can, use a tripod, a fluid head and a pan bar. Begin with a well-composed stationary image, and then lean into the pan bar. As you approach the end of the shot, which should be another interesting image, remove some of the pressure, let it come to a stop of its own accord. The same applies to the tilt shot, which is nothing more than panning in a vertical direction. The only difference is the direction in which you place pressure on the pan bar. In this case, you lean in from above, using your body to regulate the speed of the tilt rather than just your hands. Try to keep your subject lagging a little behind the center of the frame. Subjects that jump about from right to left are distracting, or worse. Better still. But be careful about your focus. Sometimes catching up with your subject and letting them drift out of the frame can result in a more dynamic picture. This technique requires 2 or more subjects who are at different distances from the camera. Despite being difficult to set up, the effect can be very dramatic. or more subtle. Pulling focus is easiest when the camera is zoomed in fully to telephoto. The subjects are then placed in the frame. When this isn't possible, simply reposition the camera. When zooming in on an object in the distance, you can't always be sure that it'll be in focus. There's a simple remedy. Zoom in on the object, focus there and then. Now pull back out. When you zoom in now, the distant object will already be in focus. You can take the same approach to ensure that your shots are correctly exposed. Manually adjust your aperture on the tones of what you are interested in. And then zoom back out. Be careful though, as this technique is not so effective when the light falling on your subject is a good deal less than the surroundings. There are two types of light, hard and soft. Hard light casts distinct, well-defined shadows. Sometimes, however, the contrast is too great. The best way to deal with it is to use either a white reflector or a piece of white card. Simply position the card so that it fills in the shadows caused by the sun. The other type of light, which is more diffused and shadowless, is soft light. Here, a silver reflector or a piece of card covered in aluminium foil can be used to bounce more light into the face, where the image might otherwise be too dull. The trouble is that although close shots with diffused light can often look attractive, the wider shots are not so impressive when compared to their sunnier counterparts. This suggests that the most favourable conditions are bright overcast, where the long shots, medium shots and close-ups are equally comparable and match up well for continuity. It's worth bearing in mind the position of the sun when filming. In each of these cases, the sun is shining, causing a haziness which can't often be seen in the viewfinder. If you're fortunate enough to catch the sun when it's low in the horizon, however, then backlighting can be a distinct bonus. Backlighting is also quite effective at close range through water. It's generally safer practice, though, to shoot with the sun in front of an object or partially to one side, as it will cause objects to fall into sharp relief. Unless you want a silhouette, of course. Another problem with backlighting can be seen here. If the subject is forced into shadow, any attempt to expose for the subject's face means that everything else in the shot becomes wildly overexposed. Natural window light can often be used for best advantage. The subject is at an angle to it. This is a shot with diffuse natural light, a silver reflector to bounce light back into the face, which is not nearly as impressive. Take a look at the following sequence.
Swift, did you hear what I said?
Sorry, I was a million miles away.
I know what you're thinking.
But there's no point in you trying to set me up with your sister. It's just not going to work. I'm not good at that kind of thing.
Oh, come on.
These blind dates.
You know the trouble I've been to. At least give it a chance.
Really can't be bothered.
Hello, Rachel. Hi. Another drink, Swift?
Yeah.
Rachel?
gin and tonic, please.
I can see.
Do you like a cigarette?
Yeah, thanks.
The secret to good editing is that you don't notice it. Now take a look at how an edit which draws attention to itself can ruin the same sequence. One of the principles of good editing is that you vary not only the size of your shot, but that you change the camera angle as well. Similarly, you can't just change your camera angle without an uncomfortable cut. It's far more natural to cut from here to here, for example. See how the opening sequence incorporates just this technique. If we were to show this roller coaster climbing all the way to the top of the track, or the real time it took for it to reach the loop, or for this man to walk the length of the trees, then the audience is in danger of getting bored. The simple solution is to cut away to something which belongs to or comments upon the action. Cutaways can also be used to suggest that hours have passed. Or to prolong an action. Even to disguise lighting continuity errors. The cut on action is one of the smoothest and most satisfying ways of progressing from one shot to another to give the illusion of an unbroken flow of action. The idea is often and well illustrated using the coffee cup example. If we take an unhappy woman, want to take a closer look at her expression for dramatic emphasis, there are several ways we could do this. Zooms on many cameras are not always very effective. Or we could cut to a close-up. But if you watch the cut again, you'll see how uncomfortable it is. This is why we need to disguise it by cutting on some suitable action. In this example, the woman now has a cup of coffee. If we film the same action in close-up, we can cut from here to here to give the invisible cut we're looking for. Moving back out is just as simple. The subject now has enough space to stand up and walk out of frame. Here are some more examples. Here is a use of the cut on action at the point of impact. And here are two cuts on the cadence of step. The most natural edit occurs at the point at which a subject's eyes leave the frame. It is more uncomfortable when they don't. It's also a useful way of moving a subject quickly between two different locations. This is another useful editing technique, where a shot of a subject looking at something is followed by a shot of what they're looking at. The audience will only accept a look when the subject's eyes focus on something off-screen. Add a few frames to let the audience look off along the gaze before the point of view shot arrives, lasting as long as it takes for the viewer to get the message. Here's another example from a different perspective. If you edit a sequence with the available sound, you'll end up with The uncomplicated solution to this problem is to record a few minutes of ambient sound and then place it over the top. The problem here is that the combination of the wind, roller coaster and higher-pitched voices distorts the audio system on the camcorder. But if you combine sound effects and music from copyright-free CDs or tapes, then the results can be quite effective. Shots are seldom interesting simply in themselves. In this sequence, a mixture of shots of animals doing their own thing is not very interesting to watch. Audiences like to watch reactions, or more specifically, actions and reactions. Have a look at a similar sequence edited with this in mind. Here's a castle, and it's the same image that anyone who chose to go to Launceston would see. Here's another castle. We've seen the shots before, but a new impression is created by combining the smaller parts of different castles together. Impressions can also be altered by adjusting the lengths of each shot. this sequence, a man is being sacked by his employer.
Don't bother stepping out. You're on your way down anyway. Don't be here when I get back.
In this second version, there's greater tension when the lift journey is kept as long as possible.
Don't bother stepping out. You're on your way down anyway. Don't be here when I get back.
By combining many small ideas together, you can create a larger one. A whole concept, such as being run over or mugged, can be built this way. As an entertaining alternative, a wide variety of ready-made animated titles, such as the one used in the zoo sequence, are available to purchase. Perhaps we should end by pointing out that this video was shot using a good quality Hi8 camcorder. You should be able to achieve the same quality with domestic camcorders.